Okay, I've pressed record now, so I don't forget to do it just now, which has been known to happen. And then we can begin our session this evening. Hi, Amita, and hi, Chris. Any questions from you guys before we start? Nothing at the moment. I just want to go quickly. Where did I put that calendar? My desk is got way too many things on it today. I just quickly want to go through the calendar for the next couple of weeks with you guys, just so that you're up to speed with where we are. So this evening, 7th of August, we are going to start looking at LU2, Learning Unit 2, which is our time value of money. And then next week, which is the 14th of August, we will already be holding our NSS for task 1, because the task 1 due date is then the following Wednesday on the 21st of August. So as usual, the time goes by very quickly before we get to task 1. And because we only see each other once a week, we don't get to cover a heck of a lot together online. So as always, we rely on you guys to make sure that you're keeping up to date with your studies on your own, and that you are working through the material steadily, and that you're coming to us with any questions that you've got. Okay, because we only have the weekly catch-up, which obviously is not enough time to fully teach the entire module. It's a very big module. Mark the task 1, that is what used to be called the assignment is now called the task 1. So that is what you will only be able to access on the due date. So you'll only be able to access that at midnight on the 20th of August. And then you'll have the whole day of the 21st of August to complete it. And before midnight on the 21st of August, you must then upload your answers. Okay. So I'm not sure if it's all of the modules, but most of the modules are moving over to the time limited task now, where you won't have assignments pre-uploaded. Oh, no, not an ask task. Your ask tasks, if you go to more resources for the module, you'll find the ask tasks listed there that you need to do this semester. And I sent a reminder yesterday just to remind you guys to keep working at your ask tasks as well, so that you make sure you've got 4 completed by the final due date. You're talking about the task, Chris. Will the task be similar to last semester? To be honest, I'm not 100% sure. If it is, then yes, of course, you're quite free to use the same answers if the questions are similar or the same. It's entirely up to you, because you've got your marked task, so you know how you did in that one. There's no problem with that at all. As long as it's your original work, you can put anything on your answer paper. Okay. And yeah, at this point, I'm not 100% sure if it will be the same task or whether it's different for the semester. We'll have to wait and see. I'm sure it will be similar. It might not be identical. It may be identical, but it will be similar. Okay, so again, as I do every week, just reminding you guys can't rely only on coming to the online class and then thinking that will be enough to cover your work. It's not nearly enough. We only really have enough time in the online class to guide you guys, to make sure that you're working steadily and to give you some pointers of where you should be, what you should be studying, and to maybe go over the more difficult points with you, and obviously to be available for questions at any time, not only when we've got our online sessions. Sorry guys if my throat is a bit wobbly tonight. Both of my daughters have been sick for the last week, and I thought I'd escaped it, but this morning I woke up with their cold. So I'm not very happy about that, because that's just before the long weekend. But let's hope it's not going to last very long. But that just means my throat's not great tonight. Okay, so without wasting any more time, anybody got any questions, by the way, anytime, feel free. Type them in the chat box. You can put your little digital hand up and ask a question over the microphone if that's quicker. Informal, so whatever you need to know, just chat away, and you can also chat to each other in the chat box as well. So learning unit 2, we know that the most important thing when you guys begin to revise and study for a learning unit is to make sure that you are focusing on the learning objectives for that learning unit, because our learning objectives, they are the assessment brief. It's like being given an assessment brief by being given these learning objectives, because they are telling us that this is what we will ask you. Okay, so you come here to your learning objectives. You make sure you identify in your textbook where each of these objectives is discussed, and then you make sure that you can do that particular paragraph question or that particular calculation. So learning unit 2 is, I think, out of the whole course, Financial Management 3A and Financial Management 3B, it's a long learning unit, and there is a lot of information to take in and to master, particularly in terms of calculations. But it is an important learning unit because these principles and calculations that we learn in learning unit 2, time value of money, we use them throughout the rest of 3A in most of the rest of the learning units, and also in Finance 3B when you go on to do that. These principles of how do we calculate the future value and present value of cash flows is intrinsic to everything we do in financial management. So that's why they put it right at the beginning of 3A, and then we use this information throughout the rest of the course. And the same thing with the next learning unit, risk and return. So your first 3 learning units, LU1 is role and environment. It's really just an introduction to financial management and to set some groundings for it. Then LU2, time value of money, and LU3, risk and return. Those are then foundational learning units where we are taught principles and calculations that we use for the rest of the course. Okay, so please remember that when you're studying for 2 and 3, it does mean that they're quite tough learning units, but it just means you've got to spend that time on them. Okay, so you really need to take your textbook and just work through from page 1 of the second chapter, read, work through the example, attempt the questions, check your solution, do the question again until you can do the question without making a mistake, and then move on to the next section. And then obviously to do it as quickly as you can, because we have, what did we say? It's basically 2 weeks to go before we have to do our first task. 712, yeah, it's exactly 2 weeks from today that we've got to do our first task. So most definitely you're going to spend that time on learning unit 2. In your recordings and in last week's discussion, we discussed EVA, economic value added, which is the calculation from learning unit 1, but the rest of this, and which isn't a massive calculation, and remember it's an open book task, so you will be able to use your textbook, but it's learning unit 2 that you really want to practice on your own and master. So also for the tasks, although the tasks are open book tasks, you must prepare for the tasks as if it was going to be a closed book test, because it is time limited. And I can assure you, you're going to be very lost if you don't study for the task and then you spend the whole day flipping backwards and forwards through your textbook and Googling like mad because you can't find the answers to the questions. Okay, and then also remember, any revision and studying that you do now is also then preparing you for the exam work. So it will then lessen your load when it comes to the end of the semester and you have to do exam revision, which is a completely closed book, sit down on campus 3-hour exam. Okay, so that's my advice to you, is right from day one, you prepare for all of the work as if you were preparing for closed book assessments. Okay, so let's take a quick look at what our learning objectives are for Learning Unit 2. So Theme 1, time value of money. Discuss the role of time value in finance. So that's really for your understanding, that you understand the role of time value in finance. So what that really is, just in a nutshell, is that as financial managers, we're often, almost all the time, working with cash flows that are going to take place in the future. And so we constantly have to work out, for instance, we do projections over the next forthcoming 5 years, cash projections, but we need to know in today's monetary terms, what is the value of those cash projections. So that is why the role of time value in finance is so important. Explain the use of computational tools. So that section in your textbook is where they explain to you how to use the financial tables, which will be given to you. It should be attached to the task and it will be attached to your exam paper, but you need to know how to use those financial tables and look things up. And then also, secondly, your financial calculator. And then thirdly, you can use the actual formulas themselves. So there's 3 different ways you can do calculations. You can use the tables to look up present and future value factors. You can use your financial calculator, or you can use the actual formula and work it out manually. And if you go through your textbook, you'll see, for instance, at the end of example 2.3, they have got all 3 versions: the question, and then using the formula, using the tables, using the financial calculator. And all of the questions are laid out in your textbook like that. You are free to use any one of those methods, excepting if the question specifically says you must use the tables for this particular question. They do sometimes do that. Then LO3, summarize the basic patterns of cash flow. This is also a very important concept that you need to understand before we go and look at the calculations, because we need to identify what type of cash flow is it, so that we know which formula to go and use. So if you go to section 2.3 in your textbooks, you'll see that is the heading, Basic Patterns of Cash Flow. So in any scenario or case study that they give us, the pattern of the cash flow will either be that the cash flow is a lump sum. In other words, it's one lump sum amount that we receive on one particular date, or that is paid out on one particular date. Or it is what we call an annuity. And an annuity is when there is a certain amount of money that is paid repetitively at a regular interval. So for instance, interest on bond payments. The interest on a bond would be paid every single year on the anniversary, and the amount of the payment would be the same. So make sure you know what the definition of an annuity is as well, so you can identify that. And then the third type we get is mixed cash flows. So a mixed cash flow is also a cash flow where there is a cash flow that takes place every year for 5 years or 10 years or whatever the period is. But unlike an annuity where the rand value of the cash flow is the same every year, in a mixed cash flow, the rand value of the cash flow each year is different. So in this instance, it's more similar to a project that a company is going to undertake, for instance, an investment in new machinery, where the cash flow that that new machinery is going to generate each year will be different as the years go on. So that's why that is put right at the beginning of the chapter, because our lump sum formulas, our annuity formulas, and our mixed cash flow formulas are specific to that type of cash flow. So when you get a question, that's the first thing you're going to identify in the question or a case study is this a lump sum cash flow? Is this an annuity, or is this a mixed stream of cash flows? And then you'll know which formula to use. Okay, so that's why they've put these as learning objectives, to direct your attention that you need to know that, otherwise the rest of the chapter is going to be a disaster. Then LO4, discuss the concepts of future and present value. And that is really, they just want you to understand what we are talking about when I say a future value and a present value. So again, just quickly to keep it in a nutshell, the future value of an amount is going to be an amount of money that I have today, which is the present, and I want to know if I invest this money for 5 years, what will my investment will be worth at the end of the 5 years. So 5 years in the future, what will my investment be worth? If I invest, for instance, a lump sum today at a certain interest rate, how much money will be in my investment in 5 years' time? So the future value is that we're trying to calculate is what will my investment be worth in the future, given the data that I've got about. I need to know what the rand value is that I'm investing. I need to know what interest rate I'm going to get, and I need to know for how long I'm going to invest it. And then I can calculate the future value. And the present value is just the exact inverse of that. If I know, for instance, an investment advisor says to me, when you retire your investment, you will get 2 million rand. And it sounds fantastic now when you're all young and fresh, but in 30 or 40 years' time when you retire, 2 million rand is not going to be worth the same buying power in the future that it would have in today's money. So if the investment advisor says in 20 years' time you'll get 2 million rand, that 2 million rand is the future value, and we then want to work out in today's money, in the present value, how much is that 2 million rand actually worth. So when we're working into the present, we multiply, when we're working into the future, we take an amount and we and a percentage, and we multiply and multiply and multiply for each year to get a greater amount in the future. So future values are always greater than present values. And if I've got a future value and I'm working backwards to work out what it's worth in the present, we take the future amount and the percentage or the discount rate, and we divide for each year back into the past. So the past is going from the future to the present. Okay, it might sound a little bit complicated now, but when you start working through it in the textbook and you follow the cash flows, it will make sense. But just remember, always think of a good example, simple examples, to orient yourself between, am I looking at a present value or am I looking at a future value in a question that they give you. Then come our calculations. So those first 4 are to set the scenes and make sure you understand all of the principles and concepts. Then come the calculations that we've got to do. So remember I said we've got 3 different types of cash flows: lump sums, annuities, and mixed cash flows. So LO5, we must be able to calculate the future value and the present value of a lump sum. So a single amount means lump sum. Describe the relationship of present value to future value. You'll see there's a short paragraph in your textbook with that heading. And that's also just really for explanation purposes for the student, so the student understands that. I can't say I've ever seen them asking that, but again, you never know, it could come up as a 1 or 2 mark theory question. Then LO7, calculate the future value and the present value of annuities. So remember, these will be different formulas. And our annuities are split into 2 different types of annuity: an ordinary annuity and an annuity due. The annuities start from section 2.5 in your textbooks. We'll talk about what the difference is between annuities and annuities due when we get there. I don't want to muddle you up now. Okay, so present and future value of lump sums, single amounts, present and future values of annuities. And when you see it's an annuity, you must just identify whether it's an ordinary annuity or annuity due. And then we go on to determining the present value of a perpetuity. So a perpetuity is like an annuity, excepting it is, can I use the word infinite? It will go on into, it doesn't have an end date. So it's going to go on forever into the future, perpetuity. If we say something is, we're preserving something for perpetuity, it means we're preserving something forever. So let's say, for instance, there's some kind of a trust that pays out an annual amount, and that trust money is going to be invested forever, and so that annual amount that's paid from the trust will last forever into the future. Obviously not until infinity, but you get the idea. In other words, it has no end date to our knowledge. Other annuities will say the annuity is to be paid for the next 10 years, or the annuity is to be received for the next 8 years. At the time limit of the annuity will be given to you. With the perpetuity, there's no time limit given. Then we've got LO9, calculate the future value and present value of a mixed stream of cash flows. So again, we identify that the pattern of the cash flows is a mixed stream. In other words, I've got multiple cash flows year after year, but each rand value for each year is different to the other years. There might be 2 years that are the same, but in general, let's say you've got 8 years worth of cash flow and they're not all the same. That's what we call a mixed stream. Then we take our formulas that we learned in those previous calculations, and we have a look to say what would happen if interest compounded more than once per year. So usually we talk about an interest rate as being a per annum interest rate, and the interest is calculated once per year and then either paid or received once a year. Compounding more frequently than annually means, for instance, let's say a car payment. We have to make our car payments 12 times a year. Once a month we make a payment if we owe money on a car. So that would be an example of an annuity that compounds 12 times per annum. And you might have an investment where they say you have got a bond, invested in a bond, and the bond pays a 10% coupon rate, and it's paid biannually. In other words, you receive it twice a year. In that case, the interest compounds twice a year. or the interest might compound quarterly, or it might compound daily. So then we just build that number of times that the interest compounds into the formulas that we've already got to take that extra timing into account. This next one is basically on the same vein. Apply the effect that multiple compounding periods have on future value and on the effective annual interest rate. So those are calculations using multiple compounding. And then this last learning objective 12, this is the section in your textbooks right at the end, section 2.9. That is called alternative applications of the formulas. So the original formulas that we learn are straightforward, calculating the rand values of the present value or the future value of those different cash flows. But remember, I said we've got several different variables that we need to know in our calculation. We either know it or we calculate it, and that's the future value, the present value, the interest rate, the number of years that the cash flow is going to take place, the number of compounding periods in each year, and then also the amount of the annuity. I'm just going to put that in there, PMT, if the cash flow is an annual amount. So each one of those is a different, excuse me, variable in our formula. Excuse me, guys. So sometimes they'll give us the present and future rand values and then ask us to calculate how many years was the money invested for, at what interest rate was the money invested, what was the rand value of the annual payment. So in other words, we are solving for one of the variables in our formula. So that then really just becomes kind of like a maths example. You'll be using exactly the same formulas, but we have to solve for one of the variables in the formula that wasn't given to us. So that's section 2.9 at the end. Okay, so I've summarized, and it's nice to have it in a summary because then you can kind of, if you just look at the textbook, it looks like pages and pages of all kinds of weirdo calculations. But if you approach it in this way that I've explained now, and using the learning objectives, go step by step. You can see the learning objectives take you step by step through the chapter. So use the learning objectives to then do exactly that, working one by one through the chapter, making sure you understand each learning objective and each concept before you then move on to the next one and master the next one's concepts and calculations, and then go, because they do follow on from each other like that through the chapter. Okay. So let me just keep an eye on the time. So I am now going to share a set of slides with you where we can just have a quick look at the present value and future value concepts and our basic starting out formulas, which is the present value and future value of lump sums. Guys, if I remember correctly, I have already uploaded these slides for you into more resources, so you can access them there. And remember, these slides are just very highly summarized notes that are made from your textbook. So everything in these slides comes from your textbook. So your textbook is your main source of information. Okay, so time value of money, understand the concepts of future and present value and their calculation for single amounts, lump sums, and the relationship of present value to future value. That's just a recap from the first learning unit. I'm not going to go through that now. You guys have got it's just to kind of remind you of what you should already have mastered and know before you move on to this learning unit. So then in LU2, we will look at the methods of calculating the present and future values of single amounts, annuities, and mixed cash flows. So how to work with financial tables. Again, these I thought I'd taken all the page numbers out. These page numbers might not be exactly the same if you've got a newer textbook. There's lots of different versions out there. But you must go through this section on how to work with financial tables. There is a description and a very nice example, example 2.1, that you can use to understand and practice with the tables. So the financial tables are printed in your textbook at the end of the chapter. And you can also find them on the formula sheet, which I've also uploaded in more resources. So if you don't have a textbook, you can access the tables in more resources, and you'll have to then print them out or download them from there. But the tables are printed in your textbook at the last 4 pages of the chapter. And then this is just an explanation on what the basic maths is when we are calculating a future value of a lump sum. So this is for example, 2.2. These RAND values come from example 2.2. We can use that to demonstrate it if you're looking in your textbook. If I have got today a lump sum of 12,000 Rand, and I am going to invest it for 5 years, and I am going to receive interest of 8% once per annum. What will my Rand value of my investment be at the end of the 5 years? So you can see from our Rand values here, we start out with 12,000 Rand, and at the end of the 5 years, we've got 17,628. When we use the future value factor from the table, 1.469, all we have to do is take our present value, multiply it by the future value factor, and that will automatically calculate the correct future value. I mentioned that the tables, there are 4 pages to the tables. You must be sure that you read the heading of each of the tables correctly before you use them. There are 2 future value tables and 2 present value tables. You've got 1 future value of a lump sum table and 1 future value of an annuity table. And then the same thing with present value. One of the present value tables is for lump sums and the other is for annuities. So the top of the page is headed correctly. So just make sure that you are consulting the correct page before you look up your factor. So this factor, if you go to the future value of a lump sum table, and in my textbook, this is on page 60. We are going to look across the top row. We are going to look for 8% and find the 8% column. And then we are going to run our finger down the 8% column until we get to the 5-year row where it says periods 5. And that is where you'll see where 5 and 8%, where they meet. The 8% column on the 5th row, you'll see that factor 1.469. So in order to use the table, we need to know what percentage interest am I going to be receiving and how long am I going to be investing it for. And then it's easy. You can use the table, look up the factor, and we just multiply that out. If you were doing it the long way round, and this is just a demonstration to show you what it is we've calculated. We start at the beginning of year 1 with 12,000 Rand. I earn 8% interest in the first year. So at the end of year 1, I've got 12,960 Rand in my bank account. Then at the beginning of the second year, I've got 12,960. I earn 8% on the increased amount in year 2. So at the end of year 2, I've now got 13,996. Then at the beginning of year 3, I've now got my increased amount, including my interest from the first 2 years. That earns interest in year 3, and so my money grows. And this is what we call the compounding effect. Because once I start earning interest and I leave that interest in my investment, I start earning interest on my initial investment and the interest I've already earned, and that is why my money grows to such a nice amount. That's what we call the compounding effect. Okay. Then again, these slides are just taking you through these first explanation tables. So at the top of page 26, there's a present value table, which again just gives you an explanation. If you were told you have got a future value of 17,628 and it was invested for 5 years at 8%, we can then work out what the present value of that amount is. So in this case, we're now going to go to the table that is headed present value of a lump sum. And in my textbook, that's on page 61. And again, you look for the 8% column and you run your finger down that column until you get to the 5th row for year 5, and you will see the factor 0.681. Then we take the future value and we multiply it by the present value factor, and that will take us back to the present value. Which page, Chris? This one that we're on now. Okay, so you followed the previous page was calculating a future value from a present value. This page is just showing you how we calculate a present value when we've got a future value. So it's exactly the same exercise we did on the previous one, excepting now what we've been given is the future value, in other words, the larger amount, and we want to calculate back to the present. What was the present value? So in other words, they're saying at the end of 5 years, you've got 17,628 Rand. How much money did you invest on day 1 of the 5 years? So again, they have to tell us it was for 5 years and that we earned interest of 8%. And then we now go to the present value tables Again, just use, if we want to work out the present value, then we're going to use the present value table. Yes, you can use the formula. We get into the formulas. This is just the way the textbook works its way through, showing you how to use the tables first and then the formulas. Because remember, sometimes in some questions they ask you to use the tables, and then other times you're free to use whichever method you want. So, okay, yeah, remember, and you must know your tables as well, because they often include a question where they ask you to, where they specify that you must use the tables. And it can be tricky if you haven't practiced that. Then this is the basic patterns of cash flow, which I've already explained to you. You can have lump sums, annuities, or mixed cash flows. Yes, I know that they practically always do that, so you must be prepared. And this is very important. It's key. If you can't recognize the basic pattern of cash flow in the given scenario or case study in the question, then you're going to use the incorrect formula. Because if you've misidentified whether you're trying to calculate a future value or present value, or whether it's an annuity and you've said it's a lump sum, you won't get your calculation correct. So you must practice identifying these correctly. So in your textbook, again, you've got examples of every one of these. So make sure that you know, you can recognize the difference in the wording and the pattern of how do I receive or pay out the money. Is it once at the beginning and then that's it? Is it every single year and it's the same amount every single year? Or is it every single year but a different amount every single year? And again, that's only practice that's going to get you there. So then we come to the actual formulas. So this is what you were thinking about, Chris. The present and future value formulas, again, for lump sums. Remember here we're looking at lump sums. So future value formula, this is on page 27 in your textbooks. If you're going to use the formula, the formula says we take the future value, in other words, the rand value that we're going to have in the future, and that if we want to calculate that, we must take our present value, so that would be known, and we multiply that by, and the 1 plus r to the power of n, that is this is the calculation for that factor that we looked up on the table. So for instance, in that previous question that we had, it said 5 years and 8%. So the R represents the percentage and the N represents the number of years. So if we said 1 plus 8%, it would be 1.08 to the power of n, and it would be 5 years, so to the power of 5. The answer is 1.469. And if you go and look up on your table, what is the future value factor for 8% over 5 years, you get 1.469. So the tables is basically where they've just done all the calculations for us and then put it into a table. So for those people who don't want to use a calculator or don't understand the formulas. Okay. So just make sure you understand this. We use the future value formula when it is the future value that we are trying to calculate. So that means we need to know the variables that we need to know are the present value, the number of years, and the percentage interest. And then we can calculate the future value. The compounding concept, I'm not going to go through that. You guys know how that works. Future value example 2.3 in the textbook. Use that to make sure that you understand using the formula and using the tables and using your financial calculator. And then the present value formula for a lump sum. In this case, it's the PV, the present value that we want to calculate. And the formula says, take the future value and multiply that by 1 plus r to the minus n. So we use to the minus n because we will be dividing. Remember I said when we want to go from the future back to the present, we've got to divide to get back to the smaller amount. The future amount is the larger amount, which is why we go 1 plus r to the positive n if we're working forwards into the future. And when the present value is the smaller amount, which is why we use 1 plus r to the minus n when we want to go divide to get from the larger amount to the smaller amount in the present. And again, the present value formula is used when we know what the future value is, but we need to calculate what it is worth in the present. And for the present value lump sum formula, you can use example 2.4. And that again has got using the formula, using the tables, and using the calculator. So work through all three of those methods to make sure that you are up to speed with them and you understand them. And then you can also practice question 2.3, and that will help you to practice to see if you can do a question. So that's like a little mini case study, a little story, a scenario, and you can start practicing identifying each of those different variables in the question that they give you. And then this last slide is just that one paragraph, the learning objective that says what is the relationship between present value and future value. And it's essentially an inverse relationship because if my present value factor is 0.681, if I take 1 and I divide it by the present value factor, my answer will be the future value factor. And if I take 1 divided by the future value factor, my answer will be the present value factor. So it's just showing you that they are completely linked. You can work forwards to the future and you can work backwards from the future back to the present. And that's also just explaining that concept. But I wouldn't worry too much about, like, don't try and memorize this whole thing. If you just remember the sentence that the present value is the inverse of the future value and the future value is the inverse of the present value factor, then that should be enough. And you'll get to understand that concept the more you work with present value and future value calculations. So guys, I know we've got to go super fast. It's a huge chapter. There's masses of information in it. So all we really had time for is to do an introduction so that you guys can start getting some help to understand the future value and present value concepts. And then it's up to you now to really spend these next 2 weeks working your way through Learning Unit 2. So that's your homework, is to literally work through from the beginning, steadily through Learning Unit 2. And don't forget, as I say, there are three sets of slides for this learning unit, and they are all uploaded in your more resources. And go use the slides because they are it's a textbook summarized. And if you use the slides first and then go to the textbook, it might help you to not start getting muddled up in all sorts of different directions. Okay, do I have any questions from anybody? Guys, remember, you're going to go through all of this in your own time. And as you work through it and you've got questions, just send me a message, email or whatever, and I will help you. Don't hesitate to ask while you're busy studying. Anything that you don't understand, how did they work out this amount? Why did they do that calculation? I don't understand why this is a lump sum and not a whatever. Then you just ask me. Okay. Chris, you fine? That's good. Hope you guys are going to manage and study hard. It is a lot of work, guys. I'm telling you right now, the only way to do well and pass this module is you've got to invest the time. Hours and hours and hours of study and practice and study and practice. It's the only way you'll pass your numeric modules. Especially the practice. That part is just absolutely key. I can't emphasize that enough. No questions at this stage anyway. Okay, guys, I will see you next week, Wednesday, and we will continue. I'll just maybe go through the next set of slides with you on this time value of money chapter, just to help you understand. Learning the financial calculator. So, Chris, the problem with the collabs, as I said, we've only got 2 collabs left before the test. So we've got next week, and the one after that is the NSS. So we don't have a collab where we can use a whole collab just to work on the financial calculator. So I uploaded that PDF for you guys on the financial calculator. So print it out, and you honestly, guys, if you take your textbook, at the end of every question and every example, they've got the financial calculator steps written down there for you. And the only way, and this is how I got used to it as well, because I also wasn't used to working with the financial calculator. I had to also teach myself. They show you in the textbook each of the keys and what you've got to punch into the key. And then you just keep doing that until you get the same answer as they've got in the textbook. Yeah, and also, you know, the PDF, in that PDF that you've got, you probably won't do all of those calculations. But at least it's some guideline on how to navigate your way around the calculator. But don't try and memorize them off by heart. Rather use the textbook, where at the end of every example and question, where they say the solution, where they say using a financial calculator, and that little table that they put in your textbook. Rather use that, and then just use the PDF to like look up instructions on how financial calculators actually work. Because also the problem with me helping with financial calculators is that students have got all kinds of different calculators. They've got HPs and Sharps and Casios, and they don't all work the same. So take your little booklet that you got with your calculator, take the PDF and use your textbook, and literally sit there. I used to sit there for an hour with my calculator in the textbook and just punch in those calculations over and over again until I got the right answer every time, and then I got the hang of it. Because everybody's calculator might be slightly different. Most important rule with the calculators, though, Chris, and I'm glad you asked about the calculators. Before every single calculation that you do on your financial calculator, is make sure you clear the memory. Because if you've done a calculation and there is an answer stored in the financial calculator's memory, the next calculation that you do, it will use that stored amount and give you the wrong answer. So just make sure that you clear the memory first every time. Chris, if there is any particular question in one of the past papers or in the textbooks that you are not sure of with the financial calculator, then just ask me, and then I can write out the steps that you need for the financial calculator and post that for you. If there's perhaps you don't understand what the textbook is talking about. Okay. And I'll try and help you that way. Okay, guys. Awesome. Pleasure. Okay, guys, I'll end the recording now.